Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to warmly welcome you to this year's Academy Under Trees on the topic of Europe's evolving approach to collecting items from colonial contexts. I am Angelika Eder, and I'm standing beside Naomi Kaufmann, and we are both welcoming you today. Now, first of all, a quick note on the languages. At the bottom of your screen, you can see a select language button. You can select between German, French, or English, or choose inactive. Those are our three conference languages. Now, Academy Under Trees was held last year, or it was planned for you last year, on the same subject. Again, Academy Under Trees to be taking place here. So the topic has become ever more topical and more pressing ever since last year. Now, this year, we are doing a digital format. We are part of a worldwide network, and ever since last year, we are doing this in a digital format. Now, we are pleased and happy to be having this opportunity to host this meeting in a digital format, because this way we can host guests from Belgium, Benin, the Democracy of Congo, Germany, France, Great Britain, Jordan, Cameroon, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Austria, Namibia, Switzerland, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Tanzania, Togo, and the United States. And obviously this makes us very happy. Now, Macron, the French president, started the debate when he announced that the French legacy shouldn't be any longer a prisoner of the European countries. Then he commissioned a report on the restitution of African art objects by Savoie and Sarre, and this report has stirred up communities. In Germany too, we are trying to come to terms with our past. The coalition agreement foresees to restitute collection items or to research about the provenance and to provide further funding for provenance research. State Minister Rutgers announced a better focus and a new initiative evolving around the Benin bronze. In Germany and France, the first statutes as part of the Benin bronze were restituted to Benin. And today we are going to embark on a more deep discussion. We will ask our neighbors, we will open up perspectives, and we will try and gain more insights from our dialogue partners. Now, I would like to wholeheartedly thank the interpreters who make this multilingual format possible. I would like to thank the foundations and the federal state of Brandenburg. I would like to thank our funding carrier and the Zeit Foundation, and also would like to thank our partner, the Dialogue en Humanité in Lyon. And I would like to say that we are part of their network. It's great to have a representative here today as well. Now I would like to hand the floor to Naomi Kaufmann, who has drafted today's program. Hello, a warm welcome from me. Now I would like to make a few comments and add to what my colleague said. Now, besides the Savoie report, there is another report which will be published and which has already been drafted. In the Netherlands too, papers were drafted about restituting art objects. Now, for us, it was really about understanding what the differences in concepts were, to understand which pathways are being suggested. And we are wondering, how do other European countries tackle this question? Which role does the legal aspect play in all of that? And we would also like to ask, which claims do countries of origin make and who are the claimants? Now, provenance research, transparency, inventories, digitization, international cooperation, circulation, universalism, and restitution. Those are buzzwords which play a key role in our debate. And I'm sure we will hear a lot about those terms. But the examination of the German colonial past and the question of remembrance play an essential role. In the countries of origin, restitution of objects may help in overcoming traumas of previous generations. Restitution can also help to make accessible the own identity and cultures and strengthen that access and help and enable young generations. And when objects are returned, something new can arise. It's about remembrance there as well as it is about remembrance here. It's about how remembrance can help to decolonize European countries. Examining the colonial past shouldn't be limited to exclusively the restitution of objects, but it is a very important step. This is all I would like to say for now, because we will hear some discourses and some presentations, but I would like to briefly draw your attention to the rules which we comply with whenever we hold Academy Under Trees gatherings. Those are very ordinary common sense rules, however, which very briefly or quickly get forgotten in the heat of the debate. Now, let me repeat those rules. Now, the rules are as follows: freedom of speech, benevolent attention, listening and respect, equality in transnational discourse. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator for today. He's called Axel Rahmlow. He's a journalist with Deutschlandfunk Kultur, and he's going to guide you through today. And Ms. Rahmlow, here you go. The floor is yours. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Academy Under Trees, everybody. Germany's approach to collection items from colonial contexts. We've already heard brief words on the topic. Thank you so much to the Genshagen Foundation, who's invited us. And we would like to jump right into it. We would start in Benin, in France, two countries which are characterized still and are closely connected still through their colonial past and have different perspectives as regards the colonial past and objectives. Jean-Marc Ayrault will give us a speech, and between 2012 and 2016, he was the Prime Minister, and after some time later, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And Jean-Marc Ayrault also had to deal with the question of restituting, collecting items. And then in 2016, he still refused this idea, but then he changed his opinion. Unfortunately, he won't be able to join us here live. He has a very good reason, because the now President, Emmanuel Macron, invited him on the opening of the foundation of the remembrance of slavery. And he is there because he is the president of said foundation, and Emmanuel Macron appointed him the president, so we will forgive him for not being here today. But he gladly recorded a video stating what his insights, what his feelings are regarding collecting items. And these are his insights. Here you go.
Bonjour, guten Morgen. Je suis vraiment désolé de ne pas pouvoir dialoguer avec Marie-Cécile Zinsou. J'ai la chance de la connaître.
Very sorry that I can't talk with Marie-Cécile. I'm very happy to know her, and I know the work she does in her art center in Benin. It's a remarkable work. And in this work, she creates a connection between contemporary art and the history and the heritage of her country. And I know that she is doing very much for the restitution of works of art which belong to the history of African countries. And that is why I'm going to tell you a little bit about my feelings and my impressions on this topic. It's a difficult topic, but we definitely have to deal with it.
After the human plunder of Africa with the slave trade and slavery, that is during the first colonization. The second colonization, with its violence, forced labor, the inferior status of the natives, the massive plundering of the artistic and cultural heritage took place and even continued during this period. This is a topic that is often forgotten. We talk much more about the slave trade and slavery, even though this is quite new. I'm the chair of the Foundation for the Commemoration of Slavery, and I know that this is sometimes a sensitive subject. But when it comes to the questions of the artworks, it's even more sensitive now. It's like a taboo subject, a forgotten subject, but one that has recently become topical again thanks to an important political initiative that I welcome, that of the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron. During his visit in 2017, I believe it was 2017, to Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, the President had made a very important speech on this issue and the need to instigate this debate or to simply start it. He then commissioned Felwine Sarr and Benedict Savoy to produce a report that caused a stir and generated long discussions. I would even say that it caused controversy, especially in France. I don't know about the other European countries because, after all, this question concerns not only France, but also the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, and all colonializing countries. So it is a question that must be tackled head on, because without this coming to terms, there will be no reconciliation. And I believe that this question does indeed arise, even if the French position is traditionally based on the principle of the inviolability of works of art that are the property of museums, state museums, or local public museums, and which are in fact the property of the nation, the property of the French people. That's how the question has been put so far. I was in government myself, I was prime minister, I was a foreign minister. I know that this is a difficult question. I remember the discussion I had with my colleague, the foreign minister of Benin, but that was really at the end of my term. And I could see that this issue was raised, but that we had to change our doctrine. Well, we've started to change our doctrine, not completely, but it's also an opportunity to look back at the whole colonial legacy, because we must not forget that it is the whole of Europe that is concerned. We mustn't forget that Bismarck organized a congress in Berlin in 1884-85, where Europeans split up Africa. West Africa had already been partially conquered by France, but Dahomey in particular had not yet been conquered. In 1892, a war of conquest took place in what is now Benin, then still Dahomey, which led to the systematic looting of the royal treasure and the works of art there. King Bernzine, who was a very important king with a significant role, resisted, but was eventually arrested. He was held on a French-owned island, Martinique, and all his artistic heritage, all his treasure was transferred to France. His works, which are very plentiful and also have a symbolic character, became the property of the French state. And we know that for a long time, this dimension was highlighted by the colonial exhibition, by human bone collections, the museums dedicated to exotism, like the Museum of Ethnology, the Musée de l'Homme, whether in France, Germany, or Britain. There were competing efforts to create these institutions, so it took a very long time and remained deeply embedded in people's mind. And so it is often painful to address this issue. And that is why I spoke earlier about a taboo subject. But there have been turning points. And the turning point also came from Western artists, from European artists. I'm thinking of Apollinaire, for example, who recognized the immense talent of African artists, which inspired him and the avant-garde, and also turned art history on its head, which challenged academicism, and which was also the opportunity for these avant-garde artists to appreciate the heritage of French artworks. That's how it started, but it wasn't enough, because in 1928, for example, a whole expedition was organized from France to all the French colonies to take the artworks, ostensibly by buying them, but in reality by looting them. Michel Leiris, for example, wrote a book called Phantom Africa that tells the story very well. At first he thought he was doing a useful job, but gradually he realized what he was doing. And this helped to further enrich the collections of European museums. For example, in France, by around 50,000 objects that were looted. So the story is a very long one, and I won't tell it in all its detail. But I think that the demand for the return of cultural objects is a symbolic one, just as the one to return human remains. This is a very important issue. You may remember Saji Batman, who was called the Hottentot Venice, and who was hideously displayed in the shows, the human zoos, and who was a woman who was born in Cape Town and died in France, and whose skeleton was modeled. Her skeleton remained in the archives of the museum, and France wouldn't return it to South Africa, where she was born. And after the end of apartheid, when Mandela became president, there was a demand for the return of her skeleton. France agreed to that. It was a first exception. Her skeleton was returned to her country of origin, and she was given a funeral that honors her memory. So I think we have to be very careful. The works also have a spiritual and artistic character, especially in Benin, where with the voodoo culture, this is a very, very important issue. The issue of human remains also contributes to the transmission of history and memory. So this issue concerns the political institutions, the museums, and even the museums that have started to come to terms with it. You will remember the exhibition at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, the Black Model, which looked at the paintings held in various museums, including the Louvre, and which provided a new perspective on these works. The Foundation for the Memory of Slavery, of which I am chairman, therefore wants museums and all cultural institutions to take a new look. You could almost say a decolonial look at their works by presenting them differently. This also applies, of course, to works that were looted throughout the colonial period up to the independence. We mustn't forget that at the time of the independencies, the new governments, supported by their peoples, demanded the return of this heritage, which was rejected at the time. Returning the land was fine, but not the artistic creation. So this is a very important issue, to strengthen identity, social ties, to give points of reference, especially for young people, to know the past, to have a heritage, to appreciate it. I think it's important and necessary for nation building. And it's also necessary to envisage new relations between the former colonializing countries and the former colonies, which today means the countries of Africa, but also Asia and the Indian Ocean, so that this question can be addressed and asked. The report by Zar and Benedict Savoy calls for an inventory to be drawn up first, and then for discussions to be held between the applicant countries and the countries that currently own all these works. So I think this is the right basis. Some people were shocked by this. But I think that after the initial reactions, which were very strong and polemical, people are now calmer and more ready for dialogue. I can testify to that. I myself was present at the inauguration of the Museum of Black Civilizations in Dakar. The question was raised by the authorities who were there, political authorities, cultural authorities, and it is true that some things have changed since then. French law has evolved. 26 works belonging to the Bernzin treasure were returned by the law of 24th December 2020. And this also applies to the sword with its scabbard, which belonged to a Singhalese chief, El Hajj Maltal, and which was originally loaned at the time of the inauguration to the Museum of Black Civilizations and is now kept as a deposit for a limited period, but which I believe will finally return to its rightful place in Dakar. When I was Prime Minister, I was involved in something special in New Caledonia. It wasn't a work of art, but the skull of a Kanak chief who had resisted the violence of the colonizers by refusing to allow them to take the land the ancestral property of his people. And he was killed. He was killed by an act of treason, and his skull was taken away and kept in Paris in the Museum of Ethnography and Ethnology. And it was only in 2013 that I, as Prime Minister, made the commitment that this skull, which is considered a symbol of resistance against the colonizers, would be returned. But this decision wasn't taken unilaterally. That is, not as a paternalistic or neo-colonialist act, but in dialogue with the customary Senate of New Caledonia, because it took steps before this skull was returned and solemnly accepted, steps towards reconciliation among the Kanaks, because there had been tensions between different tendencies, but the Kanak culture is a culture of reconciliation. This skull symbolized that. A long time later, these human remains symbolize something strong and also allow a people to build a future and a destiny. And so this reappraisal is a real remembrance work. And I believe that we have enough distance to approach this question with our museums in a calm way, not polemically, not with the worry that tomorrow all the museums in Paris, Berlin, or London will be deprived of their collections. No, but by dealing with the issue in a fair, honest, and sincere way, I believe that we will be able to move forward together, because the challenge is precisely to move forward together. Building this new world of equality and brotherhood requires respect for history and memory, and respect for the heritage that peoples have gradually built up over the course of their history, with all the contradictions that this entails. So this is what we need to address openly, and I'm happy to tell you today about my commitment. Even I can't do it in person. I can't discuss it in more details with you, unfortunately, but I hope that you will have a very fruitful exchange.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc Ayrault, for his perspective. He is the former Prime Minister of France, and I would like to welcome all who joined us during the course of these introductory words to the Academy Under Trees. Europe's evolving approach to collection items from colonial contexts is our today's topic. We are talking about the identity of the countries of origin and about the relations to the former colonizing powers. And we are also talking about the future of these countries. Before we are going to listen to another speech, I would like to ask all of you out there to switch off your cameras whenever we've got live guests who share their impressions with us in order not to overkill our stream. We will have the opportunity to have an exchange with you in the course of today. We are very much looking forward to that, and I am going to tell you when the moment has come. There is this wonderful function of raising your hand. You can do that, and then I will ask you to switch on your camera and to participate in our discussion. But for the moment, thank you very much for switching your cameras off, because we would like to keep all our streaming power in order to listen to Marie-Cécile Zinsou. She is going to tell us of her experience and her perspectives. She has very many different angles of view. She is an art historian, she is an entrepreneur, she is both French and Beninese, and she's the president of the Zinsou Foundation in Benin and has been doing so since 2005. The foundation supports contemporary artists from Africa and is committed to keeping the artistic heritage of Africa. And there she is, Mrs. Zinsou. Welcome warmly to the Academy Under Trees. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. And indeed, I am going to tell you a little bit about what happened in Benin in the past 15 years, because the question of the restitution began in 2006. Then the Musée Branly in Paris just opened, and at this opportunity, the then President Jacques Chirac, who founded the museum at that time, wanted the collection items to travel to Africa. He thought that this museum is the symbol of a dialogue with Africa and that a dialogue can happen only in exchange. And therefore, it was important that the collection items from Africa traveled back to Africa for the people to see them there. In January 2006, he agreed with the president of Benin to have an exhibition on this topic. And as Jean-Marc Ayrault just said, these objects which left Africa in 1892 came back to Africa for the first time in December 2006. This was a very special moment. And of course, at that time, I dealt with this issue because I was the only one who had founded a museum in Cotonou. I was just a representative of Benin and I organized these things on the spot. This exhibition was very successful. It was the first time that these 34 objects came back to Benin. There were very important artifacts among them, for example, symbols of royal times. So it is a very valuable collection. In the course of 3 months, we had more than 175,000 visitors who were all very curious to see these objects for the first time. After this exhibition, the question was raised why these objects had to go back to Europe, because they were originally from Africa, from our country, and people did not want them to travel 5,000 kilometers to go back to Europe because they are our items, our objects. So that was when the question of restitution was raised for the first time. The question of how to get possession of these objects back, the question of showing these artifacts to older people from Africa who had never seen them before. I was living in Africa and I know Africa and Benin, but I also know France, and I know that there is this inviolability of cultural assets aspect in France. So there was the possibility to lend these objects, to borrow these objects for a longer time. At the same time, we know that this is a very difficult topic between former colonies and the former colonizers. And that is why there were many reports in the media, on TV, on the radio, why these artifacts can't just go back to Africa. And then there were the French elections in 2012 and 2017, when this topic became current again. Before that, the topic wasn't dealt with a lot. But in July 2016, the government told us that the topic of restituting objects to Africa is being dealt with. I think Jean-Marc Ayrault just mentioned that in his video address. At that time, the topic already was talked about. He was in Africa, in Benin in 2013 himself, but the inquiry of Benin of July 2016 came at a time when everybody was preparing for the elections. Jean-Marc Ayrault mentioned that the government had only 4 months left, the Hollande government, and it was just impossible to deal with the aspect of the inviolability of cultural assets, to change this aspect in the legislation. So it was not the right point in time, and it was very difficult to take a decision at that time. So the answer of the last 60 years, or for countries from Africa asking for restitution was always no. In 2017, Macron gave a speech in 2017, and this speech came just as an earthquake. It was the first time that a French president talked about the topic of African cultural assets. It had never been a topic of French presidents during their first speeches in African countries. The president said that a restitution has to take place, that cultural assets have to go back to Africa. And that was just like a revolution. In Benin, something different happened, different than in other African countries. We knew, the government said that, and now we can do something. And so the Beninese youth, which is very well connected via the social media, became very committed. And this youth mobilized. It reported a lot about the topic. The international press also reported about the topic. And this is how the topic came back to the Élysée Palace. And it became obvious that the Beninese youth wants something, wants their cultural assets back. We in our foundation had also realized that the exhibition attracted more and more people. Everybody wanted to see these objects. We had changed the opening hours. We opened at 7 in the morning and remained open until midnight. We had security who dealt with the problem of giving everybody the opportunity to see this exhibition. People needed 1 hour 45 for viewing the exhibition. Then we had to reduce that to 17 minutes per person for giving everybody the opportunity. And that happened 3 days before the end of the exhibition. So this was really a premiere for us. And the mobilization of the youth happened at a time when the government understood that this is an important topic. And the French government understood that something had to be done about it. When the report of Sarre and Savoie was written, we were in a special situation. The president read the report and said, okay, everything has to go back to Benin. That was a revolution for the Beninese youth. They were so happy. They were absolutely satisfied and wrote about that in the social media everywhere. Everybody was to understand what this was about. Everybody was to understand the history. And everybody knew that it was really worth becoming committed to this topic. However, in the Beninese institutions, there is the opinion that everything became possible due to this public mobilization. The people in Cotonou and in many other cities talked about the topic and were waiting for the restitution of these cultural assets. I think that became pivotal also for Emmanuel Macron. After that, of course, in the social media, everything happens much faster than in real life. People thought after the announcement of the 30th November 2018 that Macron will really restitute everything back. And at the beginning of December, everybody was waiting for the art items to come back to Benin. But of course, it was not that simple. And after this Twitter announcement of November 2018 and the real restitution, there is a long time. However, it all happened relatively quickly because France adopted an exceptional law. It was not a framework law, which would have made it possible for all African countries to get their cultural assets back. It was just an exceptional law for 26 objects from Benin and 1 from Senegal to give them back to their countries of origin. It was a first step, a first historic step. However, it was a very small step. The report of Savoy and Sarre speaks about more than 90,000 objects that have to be restituted. 46,000 of them have an origin which is still not clear. And in this context, 26 objects restituted back to Benin with very few. Still, the exceptional law was adopted by a majority in the National Assembly, and on the 24th of December 2020, the objects were restituted back to Benin. Between 2006 and 2021, a lot of time passed, and the exhibition that we had in 2006 will be shown again. It is organized again in Benin under the patronage of the Beninese museums. This was a topic that was addressed by very few people. Of course, it led to some debates in France, but only among smaller circles. It was not a real public debate. It was just a debate among experts. Of course, there are people who speak about the looting of art. However, it is not a very current topic for the French public. The former Minister of Culture of France, for example, never addressed this topic. On the 30th of May 2021, Emmanuel Macron mentioned in his speech to Africa that this was a first law, an exceptional law, but there are going to be further ones. The African countries haven't claimed too many objects back. We've got 7 of such claims for Senegal, which is very little, but we see that the president is promoting this topic and says that there are going to be further exceptional laws. There are some members of parliament of France who proposed to elaborate a framework legislation for making for eliminating the way of using exceptional laws. But this is what the situation looks like today. Officially, we have these objects back here for 4 months. Thank you very much for these impressions which you shared with us in our Academy Under Trees. For now, we've some time to discuss the topic. Just 17 minutes for everybody to view the exhibition, of course, is very little. We've got a very tight timetable now, but we've got time for 1 or 2 remarks, also from our audience. If anybody of you wants to react, you can raise your hand. Maybe you know this function of Zoom, and then I could enter you into our discussion. Of course, yeah, you can use the function to raise your hand, and maybe somebody wants to participate in our discussion. Let me take a look at the gallery. Of course, you've also got the opportunity after our first short coffee break to ask questions during the workshops. Okay, now we've got 1 question, and I would like to ask you before entering you to our discussion to introduce yourself and to pose your question quickly for Mrs. Zinsou to have an opportunity to answer. Oh, and please switch your video on.
Und zwar geht es Celestine Ngumbi.
Celestine Ngumbi. Celestine Ngumbi is with us. Please switch on your camera. That would be great. And we could see you.
Eine Sekunde bitte, Anna. Hallo, herzlich willkommen hier bei der
Hello, welcome to the Academy Under Trees. I will switch the spot on. Okay, welcome. The floor is yours.
Je suis Celestin Ngumbi. Je suis journaliste
I am a journalist and I work at the main channel television Egoma in Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. I come from Vende. There is a volcano that erupted recently. I followed your words with a lot of attention, and I've got one remark. It's rather a remark than a question. I wanted to know whether the Academy Under Trees already takes place in Congo as well. I know that there are some institutions from Kenya cooperating with you. However, we in Congo are also interested, particularly in the east of the country, to have an academy or to cooperate with the Academy Under Trees, because we want to broaden our perspectives. There are a lot of institutions here working on the topic of ecology and other topics too. We also work with other foreign institutions. And there are a lot of opportunities for us, also due to our work, to show the influence and the meaning of Congo. We try to implement different kinds of programs in order for the Democratic Republic of Congo to present its biodiversity to other countries. We try to become better known also abroad, and that is why we are looking for partnerships and institutions which could support us in showing and preserving our nature. Thank you very much for the Genshagen Foundation and the Academy Under Trees. This is the perfect venue to get to know each other. We've got your contact data, and I think that at the end of the day, we're going to find a way of contacting you. We are going to listen to people from other African countries too. And of course, thank you very much for the offer. I've got one more question to Mrs. Zinsou. We've got 2 more minutes left. Mrs. Zinsou, you said a lot about the youth and about the fact that the youth are very much interested in what is happening at the moment. But at the same time, steps which are taken are historic, but they're much too slow. What do Beninese people think about the speed with which the topic is dealt with in Africa, after all that Macron has said? And I have to add that we've just got 2 minutes for the answer, please.
Okay, then I'll try and be quick.
Il y a un peu de défiance, mais c'est une défiance qui est assez légitime parce qu'on ne peut pas faire abstraction du contexte.
Right, so there is a certain distrust, which makes sense because you have to consider the context, right? Many promises have been made, were made, coming from France, and they've never put into reality, not always anyway. So this is why young generations decided to just sit and wait and just see what happens. Naturally, Macron's speech were quite promising. So this is why everybody's waiting. Last year, there was no law, not in writing anyway. So this is why in July 2020, a big disappointment happened. And then as of July, things picked up pace, and then things evolved faster. So then the exceptional law was published in November. It was ratified, adopted and ratified at the end of the year. So I was in Clubhouse last month, and where many young listeners tuned in from African communities and diasporas. And after 5 hours of talking about this, we wrapped up, but we want to resume next week. And the questions were, Will there be an actual restitution? And will this mean that we will own the artworks? Or is it more about like loaning the artworks when in reality it still belongs to the French state? Will France actually restitute back the original pieces? Or are there other agreements between the two countries? And will we get copies, replicas? Right? And also, why is it that France can't get back its artworks because people say we aren't able to do that? Why does the world community suspect we are not able or well equipped to take care and safeguard our artworks? See, and this is why we often hear about rumors about getting returned replicas, fake artworks. There are 3D printers, and maybe there are rumors about that somebody's trying to replicate these pieceworks by means of 3D printing them and then restituting them back, right? These are open questions. I hope this won't happen. I don't think so, but still people are distrustful. We are skeptical. Many young people are skeptical. A lot's been said, but we are waiting, or many people are waiting for the artworks to be returned so we can actually see them.
Sehr optimistisch,
right, but you take a very optimistic perspective. I would like to thank you, and I would like to say goodbye for the time being, Ms. Zinsou, by quoting your website. It's about the Contemporary Museum, and there you write, a museum, you set up a museum if you trust into the future, if you have hope for your kids, more hope for your kids than you do for yourself. This is a very nice and a very fitting quote from your website. Thank you so much for taking the time early today. Please do stay in the feed. We have planned a lot after the break. Marie-Cécile Zinsou, thank you very much from the Zinsou Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen,